Good evening, Dreamcatchers. How's everyone doing? We haven't done an evening episode in a while. Welcome back. My name is Jamie Stozer, for those of you who don't know me. And my sister Marissa and I are going to be interviewing someone we are so thrilled to have here, a former colleague of Marissa's, who I just met for the first time, and we couldn't believe we'd never met before. So we're going to let Lindsey introduce herself in just a minute. We are here tonight doing a What's the Matter episode. We haven't done one of those in a little bit, and super thrilled to have a guest here to talk us through what it means to network and launch something new in this climate, which I think a lot of our listeners will be able to relate to. My sister and I both can relate to it because we did it this year. I think there's a lot of people doing new and different cool things right now, and relying on your network and the people that you meet along the way and really maintaining those relationships. I mean, look at what Marissa and Lindsey were able to do just connecting tonight. They've known each other for years, which I'll let them tell you about. But being able to rely on that network when you're trying to do something new is so key. And building that from the ground, no matter your stage in your career, is a really cool thing to talk about, I think, in a very timely, quote, matter for us tonight. So thank you for being here. Marissa, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I do. I want to say hello to everybody, and also those of us watching our friend Lindsey on the West Coast. Happy afternoon. We have a sunny California day here on the East Coast today. We'll take it when we can. And just some background, Lindsey, out of all of our guests, wins the prize of turning around a yes in, I would say, 18 hours, because this slot was booked for another long-term client and friend of mine, Serena, we'll get to in a couple weeks, I promise, who had a conflict with her own work schedule, and it freed up an opportunity for Lindsey, which does not surprise me, because in all the years that I have been putting people to work, I can count on one hand, and I mean this with love, the people that spend time referring others just because they want to help people. And I can count on one hand, I can name them off the top of my head, individuals that I've worked with, that whether they were my client for 1 second, which Lindsey was, it was 1 second out of 16 years. She and I have stayed in touch through every loop, hill and valley of her professional life. And she has sent me probably no less than 50 endorsed candidates that she personally spoke highly of for me to try and help them. And for me, that speaks volumes in what I do. And we just had a connection when we met many years ago. And sometimes it's just like that. And actually not enough times, to be honest. But sometimes it's just like that. So there's always been a very special, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Lindsey, but there's always been a very special connection between she and I, whether it was professional or personal. I think we just kind of were like that. And probably if times were different and our lives were different, we probably would have been actual friends, right?
I think
and
so.
Not just
Yeah.
colleagues. So anyway, I went out to her the other day because we were emailing as per usual. And I said, do you want to hop on our podcast in 18 hours? And she was like, well, luckily she had like 21 hours because she's on West Coast time. And she was like, yes. So here she is. So why don't you introduce yourself, Linz, and then we'll go back to the beginning, which is our favorite way to tell a story.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Lindsey Lopez. I am now the founder of Compliance Organized and full-time mom, director, and I would say mediator and stay-at-home, educator now? So, all of the above. But yes, thank you ladies so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here.
So happy to have
How old
you
are
too,
your kids
Lindsey.
now?
6 and nearly 4. So
That's
okay,
right.
I'm in it.
Do you have boys or girls?
One of each.
Okay, so I have a 8-year-old. I have both boys. Marissa has two girls, and I have one right in between you. My little is just turned 5 in December, so I am just as much in it as you are. And virtual preschool is just not the same thing.
Right?
But thanks, you're back in school this week on the East Coast, in our town at least. Knock wood, I knock on everything that sticks for like a little bit. Next week, spring break, and then we're virtual again, and then we'll hopefully sail through the end of the year. Let's just hope for all.
So to our listeners, by the way, if you have children, okay, we are trapped. We are free Britney. Get us out of here. We're all stuck in this life. This box that you see me in, this is as far as I go. So while the rest of you are going to weddings and living your life and putting your mask on, I'm still here in this chair. Yeah. Anyway, sorry,
We are still
I digress.
here. Okay. Well, one of the things that we like to do to start is our favorite question, which is, if you can remember as far back as you can remember, the first thing you remember wanting to be when you grew up. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I knew that I always wanted to be in fashion, but then oddly enough, I really was into bugs and I wanted to be an entomologist.
Okay.
And I figured if that failed, that I would design lab coats for different scientists. And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to become an entomologist or a geologist, I'll just like go right back into fashion and like design lab coats. But it was so random because now I hate bugs as an adult, and even as like a young adult, that was never my thing. I was very young when I wanted to do that. And it's just so bizarre looking back on it, but fashion was always in the background. And like
I'm so glad that fashion was your safety net there.
Right.
Although I don't know if I've ever heard the word, and I don't know if I would have known that word before. Did you know that word?
I love it. And
the study of bugs and insects.
And we like to say that typically when we have a conversation with someone, their earliest memory tends to have some sort of correlation to what they're doing now, even if it's the opposite. And so yours might be a little bit more opposite than most.
Right?
But the fact that you knew from an early age that you wanted to work in fashion and you were already like designing lab coats for scientists at a young age, I think that's definitely indicative of where you ended up going with your career. By the way, I will say, just shameless plug for a Netflix show I just started today. It is called, I don't know how I've never heard of it, and I'm mad at myself for just finding out about it because it's from 2019. It's called Soundtrack. And it stars Jenna Dewan, who used to be married to Channing Tatum, and I love them from Step Up, and she's a dancer, and I grew up as a dancer. And she's trying to make it as a dancer. It's a whole, I can't even go into it right now. It's so good. It basically is like the soundtrack in your mind, and there's like a lot of performing and dancing and singing in the show, and I love that. But anyway, she said a line today that I wanted to quote tonight. I specifically wrote it down, and by write it down, I mean put it in my notes in my phone, which was, she was looking for her dream job, which is what we always preach and talk about. And what is it that you wanted to be? And what was your dream job when you were a little girl? And I think she said she wanted to be a dancer, and she was trying to be. And she was interviewing to then switch to social work because she realized she was better at helping people, which she did during her dance career. And the guy said to her in the interview, I'm sorry, this isn't your dream job. And she goes, it is my dream job. I just dreamt a new one. And I thought that was such an interesting line because it's something that Marissa and I talk about all the time, is that you can dream multiple dreams in your journey. And you obviously have already had several. So, okay, so your first memory is to be in fashion. So talk to us a little bit about how you got there, not to where you are now, but kind of a little bit about, where you went to school and what you majored in and internships and kind of how you started going down the fashion path.
Moving away from bugs and moving into how I met you.
Not
right?
Bugs,
exactly.
But clothes.
So while I was in high school, as soon as I turned 16, I was like, I gotta go get a job. Like, let me go figure something out. And I started working for Tommy Hilfiger. That was like my first step into the fashion realm.
So that was your first real job. Was that your first real job?
My first real job. No, my first real job was for this theater and vaudeville company called the Great American Melodrama in my hometown. And it was great. I was like an usher. I got to be able to do like stage setup, and I dabbled in stage makeup, and I worked behind the bar. And I got to go and like, not necessarily entertain people, but be the first face they see when they're going to come to this place where they're going to be able to sit back, relax, and have fun. And the whole thing was
where was that? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a town called Pismo Beach near San Luis Obispo, Arroyo Grande. And it's an area called the Five Cities, but there's really like 10 little cities in this area. And the Great American Melodrama is over in Oceano, and it's near the beach. And it's just this really cool like theater and vaudeville house. It's still there today and does really well.
Oh my gosh,
and
I love
my
that.
friends, I loved it too. It was great. And I learned so much of like the values that are like kind of instilled in me today working there. Like always be early, not on time, be early, be ready when the lights go on, and have a smile, because everything else you can kind of improvise and like make happen, but show up, be present, be ready. So it was like, okay, I'm in it. And from there, and I was younger, I was like 14.
Uh-oh. She's frozen.
Here
She comes.
I'm just going to take the opportunity to look up There's No Beach. See what it is.
She's still frozen.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, but you're still frozen. But I can
Okay,
hear
I'm
you.
back.
You're back.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Continue.
So yeah, it was my friend's parents' vaudeville house, and so I kind of got in at a young age, off the books, the whole 9 yards. And then once I was of age to work, I started retail, and I was like, okay, like let me just get into this and like see where it takes me. And I worked there for the rest of my like high school career, and then I decided to move to San Francisco. And I was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to get out of this little town. I want to go east. So let me start going to San Francisco first, which is 4 hours north of my hometown, and kind of figure things out. And as soon as I got there, I applied everywhere. And I ended up getting hired at Emporio Armani. And it was the beginning of like the tech boom and all of this, like early, what was it, 2000, 99, 2000. And so it was just like, people were shopping, they were spending money. And I was like, wow, like this is cool. I can earn money doing this, like meeting people, networking, kind of getting my way in. And I was going to school full time. I was at the City College at the time up there and working full time. And when I had time on the side, I was making handbags, selling them at like the local like artisan and flea markets and different things like that. And then like all these billboards started going up in the city that John Galliano was opening the first Dior store in San Francisco. And we were like, oh my God, I have to work there. This is my dream job. I was super excited. And
that was a time where San Francisco was I don't mean this in a negative way, but they were not a fashion-driven city for many years. It wasn't really fashion at all until tech happened, right?
Exactly. And the people that were shopping with me at Armani were men looking for suits, la, la, la. And so when I went to Dior and got the job there was no men's. And everybody that came in was like, well, where's your men's section? Where's your men's? I'm like, this is John Galliano. Like, this is high fashion. This is like chic women's clothing. It's no way like men's, sorry, you know, but being there for a couple of years, we had a walkthrough, and our VP at the time, Susan Bartholomew, came through and said, I love your energy. I want to see you in New York. I think that you would be great there. Like, do you think that you would ever consider moving to New York? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to come to New York. I've always wanted to be there. Like, I'd like to finish school out there. Sure. And she's like, great, I'll put the transfer in for you next week. And I was like, wait, what? Like, okay. And so I did. I got up, I knew nobody in New York City. And I went out there like with my dad to go look for apartments. And it was like a crapshoot, as everybody knows, trying to find an apartment in New York City in the dead of winter. It was like February, right? And I'm just like, oh my God. But we got in there, and I remember it was Fashion Week, and I wasn't really familiar with Fashion Week, but I don't know if you guys remember, but back at Bryant Park, they would like rip off index cards and they'd put like a number on it and you could be in standing. Yep. So I figured that was the way to get in. I was there at like every show and was like, okay, like, let me see if I can get in, like start networking with people. And I was working for Dior and all this stuff. And so that's kind of like how I started to like build things and get accustomed to living in New York and like learning, meeting people, all of that. And then I met my husband at Dior. So I had to leave because I was like, okay, I can't work with him. So my boss had left Dior and went to Versace. And I was like, there is no way I'll ever work for Versace. It's too like culty and weird, and it's not my style, and it's too flashy, and there's no way I could ever sell that. And to this day, I'm pretty sure that was like the most money I ever made in my life was working for Versace. And it was just, it was incredible.
So those were post Sex and the City years.
Yes.
Right. And, or like it had happened already. You have Kim Cattrall wearing the Versace stuff. That was when J-Lo wore the dress, right?
Yes, that was when J-Lo wore the dress, and everybody had to have it.
Let's talk fashion for a minute. when J-Lo wore the dress, okay, I don't care who
One
you
of the
are.
most iconic things
Everyone
that's
knows
ever
what we're
happened.
talking about.
Yep,
Yes.
yep.
When J-Lo wore that dress is when you worked at Versace, which, by the way,
Yeah.
was always, you know, flashy and extra, but also, you know, Sex and the City and the J-Lo moment. And then also, that was around the same time. Was that when he was killed? No, right? Or when
it was
he was
after, yeah, it was a little bit after he was killed. Like Donatella had taken over, and
Right.
the boyfriend Paul was involved, and all of this kind of stuff. But and once I got in there, I realized
it's real American
yes,
culture.
it
Even though
is.
they're not American, but like that piece of it
Yeah,
was a part of American fashion history.
yeah.
By the way, that's a really good documentary. That's a really good show, by the way.
It is.
Really
it was
good
incredible.
Show. We watched that. So incredible. Fascinating.
But that's not where I met you.
No. So
then you went.
been,
how long were you there?
I was there for about 2 years. And the only reason why I lasted only 2 years was I was secret shocked by this Brazilian man who came in and he was like, I really like what you're all about. He ended up calling me, let's meet at an espresso on Madison Avenue. And I was like, okay, like, who is this guy? And I met up with him and he's like, I need you to be the director of my stores. And I'm like, I'm in sales. Like, I can't go from like sales associate to like director of store. Like, there's got to be an in between. And he's like, no, come to Brazil. You'll meet my team. You'll see everything. Like, who is this guy? And of course, knowing me, I'm like, sure. Like, okay, I'll go to Brazil. And he's like, come down like next week. We'll like have my assistant like get you all the tickets and everything else. And I was like, am I going with like a serial killer? Like, who is this person? Like, I've never heard of him, but he says he has a store in the meat packing. I'm like, what is happening? And come to find out, he had a store in the meat packing and he had these big dreams and aspirations for his over the top store. And it was incredible. And I did, like, a week later, I went to Brazil just like on a whim, like, okay, like, here, mom, here's copies of my passport. Here's everything that you might need in case I never come back.
Oh my gosh.
And then I came back, I got landed as the title of like director of his store. And that's when I really had to pull up my big girl pants and learn real fast about everyday operations and hiring and firing and buying and market week and everything. And it was all encompassed in one really short year because he was so kind of like fly by the seat of his pants kind of guy, it wasn't stable. And so I had come from this very corporate kind of background where like,
what brand was that? Where was that? What was that company?
Carlos Miele.
Okay.
Carlos Miele down the meatpacking. And I think that's where I met Marissa, because it was towards the end of there. And I was like, this just isn't steady for me. I need something a little bit more stable. And, you know, like, how can I kind of like get my foot in with this background that I now have? And now that I am in management and directing all of these people, quote unquote, like, how can I kind of like start to move up the ramp? And from there, I had left and kind of stayed within retail management and went to Temperley London, a beautiful, beautiful English brand, Alice Temperley, who ended up closing her store in New York, but has a great, beautiful stores in London. And then I kind of got hooked with the Brits. And then I went to Matthew Williamson, and he was an amazing Brit. And then from Matthew Williamson, I was like, okay, maybe these like smaller brands aren't really working out for me. Let me try something bigger. And then I decided to go to like the biggest conglomerate, which was Burberry, and was like, this is wild. And I ran the Soho store down in Soho. And I had a pretty big team, and that was really great too. And I learned so much, and it was really back into like being corporate. And then I had gotten married and was like, gosh, there's just like all these other things. And I feel like I'm giving all of my energy into this store. And it was like, I was working 10-hour days, and I didn't have a work-life balance. And my sister had kind of approached me and was like, you and I like can really do this. We're super entrepreneurial, and I think that we should like start our own business. And I was like,
working with your sister is really tough.
I know. We did it once. We didn't do it again, but Godspeed to you guys. You clearly are like in it.
We're figuring it out. We're still learning.
We're still working
you're
on
doing
it.
damn good. So you got this. But with my sister, it was like, okay, like, let's see what we can kind of come up with. And we, within our network, had some guy who is the owner of a very well-known Swiss tool company, and they made these incredible like little heart tweezers, and nobody had seen them in the US. And we were like, let's get them into the market. Let's do that. Let's find products and put them into the market that nobody knows about, and like see what we can do. And so I was like, this is kind of like a fun side hustle, because I was doing kind of side hustles previous to Burberry, but Burberry had taken like all of this energy from me that I was like, okay, like, let me see if I can kind of like reallocate it elsewhere. And so we started doing the tweezers. And that's when I started going through like my mental Rolodex of connections and networks, and like, who can I kind of like call on to like get these tweezers out there. And there was a stylist friend who was just starting out at Good Morning America with Robin Roberts, and DeAndre is his name, and he's incredible. He's still there. And he was like, well, I know Tori from like Steals and Deals, and she can like get your product on the TV, and like, you know, who knows, like maybe. And I was like, sure, let's try it. And so I was like, okay, like, let's start with like a small number, 5,000 units of these tweezers, and see what we can do. And he was able to get us on Steals and Deals. We sold out of all of our inventory, and I was like, done. What's next? Cool. Like, let's keep doing this. And it kind of like gave me some more passion and drive to like keep moving forward, that maybe one day I can kind of like be my own boss. So we pursued that and kind of continued to dabble in it. And then it kind of like fell by the wayside. You know, my sister was busy doing her thing, and she had kids at the time. And then I was like, I had decided to take like a really small, tiny break after Burberry. My husband was like, you know, take a little breather, like decide what you really want to do. Like, you're really good at like this entrepreneurial thing, but like maybe you want to stay in the fashion zone. I don't know, like kind of take a couple months to yourself and test it out. And I was like, okay. And I did. And then I got a phone call from this guy, James MacArthur, who to this day is still a huge mentor and inspiration for me. But he was on the board as an investor and as the CEO at the time for Anya Hindmarch. And he had created what Gucci Group is today. So he had brought in Bottega Veneta and Alexander McQueen and Gucci and all those different brands and made it under that one umbrella and turned it kind of into what Kering is today now. And he was like, I went in for the interview, not because I wanted the job, because I said, I'm not going to work for another British company that nobody knows up on Madison Avenue. It's going to be hidden in some like little tiny back office probably. And I don't want to do that. But I wanted to go to the interview to meet this guy and like dig into his background. And he just kept digging into mine. And it was—
You hear that, everybody?
By the way, so
I didn't mean
many
to
things.
interrupt you. I want to pause for 1 second. Did everyone hear what she just said? She went on the interview just to meet the man that was the hiring manager, knowing full well she wasn't necessarily going to connect with the opportunity, but wanted to see what else she could learn, gain, interact, receive from the meeting, which is something that unfortunately most people are not innately gifted or born with the ability to recognize that going means more, not going.
Yeah, and you know what? I think
less.
I think to just recap a couple of the things she's just said, and I think this will be a good time for us to cut our Facebook feed, because I want people to then listen to this interview to hear and unpack how you then took those relationships and all that experience and launched what you're doing now. I want to just get to that before we cut so that people on Facebook can hear this. So a couple things you just said, I just want to reiterate. One, throughout your journeys already that you've shared, you have used one of our mantras, which is say yes, just say yes. So if you're given an opportunity, if you're able, and the risk is like something doable, say yes, right? So yours might be extreme, like going to Brazil with a random stranger, but being able to say yes to these interviews, to these meetings, these opportunities, to going to New York, to going to Brazil, to just saying yes to opportunity is fascinating to me. And the other thing that you said already that we preach always is network most when you need it the least, right? You're having conversations with people no matter what. You're going on interviews. You never know unless you go. Another mantra we always say, just going on these meetings just to see who you'll meet, unpack their story. Maybe they're, one of my favorite stories is, or pieces of advice is, you never know if that guy is about to leave and go elsewhere and then can hire you there. So having those, that intuition at a quote young age in your journey is so inspiring to me as a counselor, but I think very inspiring to our audience. And also you're building a network as you go and you don't even realize it, but you are. And I also find what's fascinating about you, which is similar to me, is you craved corporate, but you actually are entrepreneurial, which is so an interesting combination. And I am the same in that I went to a big college. I wanted to work in corporate. I worked for huge organizations, but always wanted to start my own thing, was always side hustling, doing something. And it takes some time to get there. And all of a sudden you're like, you have that aha moment. So not to fast forward, but I do want to kind of fast forward to where, if you could just bring us to speed from where you just left off to the aha moment, which is
Wait, I just want, before you do that, can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yeah, you've had no trouble.
Because everyone's frozen on my end, but I just want to say, two things, speaking to my fashion audience. Our fashion audience, first of all, Lindsey is an example of a true, someone that put something in front of her and was able to obtain or chase what she wanted. So anybody in the industry will still find the fact that she was able, just within retail, the fact that she could work for a Versace and also work for a Burberry is a very, very, very telling storyline. Now, granted, when I met her, I believe, as a candidate in between the Brazilian expat moment. And then before she went to Matthew Williamson, which is a brand I still admire and look at all of his interior design stuff now on Pinterest all the time. But then she was my client when she went to Burberry, which, granted, she worked the Soho store, which makes a lot of sense. If you're a New Yorker, you would understand that if she was going to run any of the stores with her background, she was much more a Soho or meatpacking hiring a store director than what she described herself as a Madison Avenue store director. Not to say that Madison Avenue is not amazing, of course it is, but her personality and her energy and her networking was much more of a downtown vibe. Anyway, I think that speaks to also the fact that what Jamie was saying, she was entrepreneurial, but also craved corporate, which is interesting when you're able to utilize both pieces of your brain. Getting to that now point where we draw up the fact that the bug scientist in her, okay, also liked the operations, right? She liked the facts, she liked the structure, and she craved the structure and leaned on the structure and recognized that these small, lean businesses, even with these big corporations, her exposure to the big corporations made her see what some of the smaller organizations maybe lacked and or could use. So Jamie and Lindsey actually have a lot of stuff in common, because Jamie came from corporate and joined me at Choice and basically gave me a backbone that I did not have because I didn't know to have it, right? Anyway, so I am going to correlate for you that bug science, which I can't say the fancy word that started with me, translates to grown-up retail compliance, okay? I'm going to let you define that and say how you sidestepped, channeled your entrepreneurial spirit, married it to your retail experience, and are doing something now that you would never have ever in a million years thought you'd be interested in way back when. Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, before we cut our live feed, just bring us fast forward slightly from where you were just now, and tell us how you then went from there to your aha moment, and tell us just briefly about your current venture, and then we'll have Ming cut our sound so that we can finish the conversation. So just bring us up to that aha moment, if you don't mind.
Okay, great. So I had met James MacArthur at Anya, and we had an amazing interview. And then he called me back to offer me the position. And I was like, no, I don't want it. But it was so great to meet you. Thank you. He called me again. I don't know. And then a third time. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to try this out. Let's do it. And it was there at Anya Hindmarch. He had left, unfortunately, and a new CEO came in, and she was doing a walkthrough. And she said, what is all of this on your walls? This is awful. And this is not chic. Find a solution. And I was like, okay, let me see what I can do. And that was my aha moment, that we did so much research. We tried finding a solution to hang these compliance posters that were lining our stairwell down into our back office that didn't look pretty, but at every gorgeous and chic store I worked for had all this junk in the back office that had to be there. And so we were researching and doing all this, looking and researching, just trying to find something, and nothing was on the market. And I was like, there's no way that there's nothing on the market. And so I had ripped out a 3-ring binder spine, attached it to a drawer track, and then rigged it to the wall and hung our posters on this concoction that I made, and was like, okay, like this works. Let's just like see. And then I was like, hold on, maybe we can build this out. And then that's when we started really diving in and doing more research. And then all of a sudden now I'm manufacturing this thing, and it's a poster hanger that nobody realized that they needed, because it's the only way to hang, stack, and flip and organize your back office in a neat, decluttered way, to where it's easily accessible for all your associates, right? And people don't realize that these can hang one on top of the other. As long as they're easily accessible, it's good to go by the government. And so it's like, okay. And then from there, I was like, wait a minute, this is such a broader market. It can be for architects and engineers to hang their blueprints. It can be for teachers and their educational tools. It can be for all financial institutions, hospitals, and all the employee notifications that need to be hung, in addition to the compliance that needs to be hung. Or use it at home for all your kids' artwork that they bring home, that we're like, I don't want that on the refrigerator. I don't need it all over the walls. You know, I want it kind of neat, but now we can hang it in like a proud yet conspicuous manner behind their door in their bedroom, where they can now see all of their artwork in these plastic sleeves, and it can be like all like compartmentalized. So like it kind of goes back to the entomologist thing. We're like, no way, but then now a manufacturer. Okay.
I love this. By the way, am I able to Ming, can you let me share my screen fast before we wrap? I want to share our Facebook feed. I want to see if I can share my screen. There, he let me. Thank you. And I'm going to bring up your website fast so I can show a picture of it, because I think that is so genius. And I came from corporate HR. Okay, so just for our audience, so you understand. When I was at corporate HR, I worked at Turner Broadcasting, which is CNN, TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim. I worked in their New York office and at Time Warner Center, and was a part of the HR team. I was the only recruiter on the New York City HR team. And so we had one of my jobs at that job, and also at my first job in HR at an agency, a PR agency, we had so many of these posters, and they had to be visible by law, just so that everyone understands, you know, the minimum wage.
I was going to say, explain it.
The workers' comp poster, the minimum wage poster, the employee rights poster. There are federal requirements to almost anyone out there that has non-exempt, to use a fancy word, hourly employees on site. They have to have these posters visible to their employees. It is a government rule. And if a federal government, representative came in to your store, to your place of business, and they weren't out, you would get heavily, heavily fined. So it is a very important thing. They have to be hung. And to put it in layman's terms, I actually shared this with Maris before, who works for us, about you, Lindsey, because she was like, as a layman, she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, think of it this way. You know, when you're at a restaurant and there's a poster in every bathroom that says, do not drink while you're pregnant. Okay. That is by law. Like, you have to have that up in a restaurant. So that is an example of something we see as consumers. But if you've never worked in a restaurant, in a store, in an HR department, you may not have ever seen these, but it is a very real, very visible thing. And they're enormous, and they're like laminated, and you have to find space for them. So I think that this is a great place for me to show it. And then and then we'll tell Ming to cut it. So let me do this. What is your website? I'm going to pull it up really fast.
Complianceorganized.com.
Okay. And then I'm going to share my screen so everyone can see it fast on the Facebook page.
Brilliant Shark Tank moment.
Oh yeah, Shark Tank. Shout out. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen.
Sharks, you heard it here first.
Right?
Can you see this? Can everyone see it?
Yep.
Yes? Okay. So
Hang
here,
it, stack it, flip it.
So here you can see,
it's like
these are all this might look familiar now to you from wherever you work. These posters, they are cumbersome, they are large, but they are by law required. So
nobody cares about them. But
nobody cares. They're like, but you have to have them up, and likely no one's really looking at them, but they have to be there. So here's what we like to say: Lindsey saw a need and filled a need. This is something that is like every genius business model or business plan in the world sees a need, fills a need. So here's what she was able to do. she created what, like you said, you were able to take this like 3-ring binder situation, attach it to what looks like a retractable door thing. So do you want to just describe it fast while it's showing?
Yeah,
So
totally. So it's wall mounted, it's metal, it retracts out from about like 2 feet out to 3 feet. And it also comes with pre-hole punch large plastic sleeves that fit the posters, but they also come compartmentalized. So you can fit different size posters and different size pages in them. Swings out at a 90-degree angle. So that way you can flip the posters behind. That way they're easily accessible. And then it goes back closed, locked to the wall. So something super easy.
Smart.
You put the sticker, like,
it's so smart. Look at this. And by the way, California law, it should be a separate entity like literally Marissa and I, we recruit obviously for positions often. We're like, knowing California labor laws is like a job requirement, like next level, like bold 72 font, because that is in and of itself something. If you need to know these laws and labor laws, and they need to be displayed, and especially in California, but every state. So I think that this is so genius. And on that note, I wanted to just share that with everyone and show her website, Compliance Organized. And just quickly before we cut our feed, what's your status with this right now? Like, are you trying to get it into everywhere? What is your, tell our audience how if they're interested in this, if they have a store, if they work for a company, like what stage of the process are we in right now?
Well, we are continuing to take pre-orders at the moment because it has been a very long process trying to get this thing manufactured. You think it would be really easy, but after reaching out to over 150 manufacturers in the US, not one was willing to take it on or capable to do it. So we've had to go overseas, and now we are finally in contract with the supplier who is producing the pilot, and in 45 days, that pilot is getting launched, and they are all pre-sold. But if other people or businesses, companies want to pre-order it, we can also include that into another lot that we'll be getting within the 45-day mark. And then we'll be taking big orders we're going to do buyer to buyer first, like Staples, Office Max, big kind of retailers like that first, and then partnering up with compliance poster companies. So all of those compliance poster companies that send you those notifications that look like they're coming from the government, but they're not. They're saying like, your posters are out of date. You got to get new posters, la, la, la. Well, I'm going to be partnering with those people so they can sell the poster in conjunction with the device. And then it's an all-in-one kind of full sweep and just sends it over to you. When you get your posters, you got the device. Makes it easy.
I love this. And by the way, mind blown. Okay, Ming, you can go ahead and cut our Facebook. Thank you, Facebook Live. This was awesome. And if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, which I am like enthralled with this idea, I think it's genius. Check us out on Spotify and Apple.
A nail biter. This is a nail biter.